Hello, I'm Michael Ravenwood, and this is the Skyfire Academy. So what we talk about a lot in the Academy is how we can be happy. Why? Because happiness is, after all, the central goal for every human. We might believe we want money or power or a different partner, but really what we want is the experience that we believe we're going to have when we acquire that thing. Now, happiness is this kind of elusive experience that people have. Sometimes we feel more happy, other times quite naturally not as happy. Do we need to be in like elation and ecstasy every moment? Probably be unnatural and definitely freaky to the people around us. But we all want to be happy at least a majority of the time, or at least not profoundly sad a majority of the time. So how can we access this state of happiness? There's many different dimensions to it, and this video is all about exploring how we can find happiness through understanding our needs. It's one of kind of the more core principles to getting, into a state of happiness is getting all your needs met. Now, needs are something that we all understand to a certain degree, and some of them are very, very obvious. Obviously, physical needs like food, clothing, shelter are kind of like this base level that we need to feel at least safe and comfortable in our lives. But there are other like physical needs that are not always addressed, like touch. So another human need sort of category is our emotional needs. These are based on, for example, the esteem we might have from people that we respect. People that we find very dubious. It's not so important that we have their respect or their regard, but people who we admire, people who we might want to be like in one sense or another, we like to have their respect. And if we don't have the respect of anybody that we respect, then it kind of feels like we got an emptiness inside, like, something's missing. Another thing that can give us this feeling is when we don't respect ourselves. No matter what another person, no matter how amazing they might be, might say about us, if we ourselves don't really believe it, or if we keep focusing on elements of ourselves that are lacking in our own perspective, we're also going to have that nagging sense that something's missing. So self-esteem is one of the needs that we have. So in terms of, for example, intellectual needs or mental needs, we need to learn. We all would get terribly, terribly bored if we didn't have new experiences and new things to think about. Now, it's worth noting at this point that everybody has sort of a varying level of interest in these needs. We all have physical needs, but some of us may or may not need as much touch. Some of us, though we all have emotional needs of some kind, might be more interested or more in need of the respect or the regard of others, whereas some might be able to generate happiness through self-esteem primarily. In intellectual needs, or mental needs, we want to be able to create. And not only are there, various ways that we can express that, like artistic creativity or more like scientific or engineering creativity. You might say that there's no difference, but perhaps there is. Regardless, the intellectual needs are important and perhaps of varying levels of importance for various people, though. Certain people might not like to read a lot of things or explore a lot of new things. They might be happy to do the same thing over and over again, maybe just in new ways. Or maybe it makes them feel comfortable and happy just to do the same things. And so for those people, it's really important to find those grooves and stick to them. So finally, as I mentioned, I believe that there is a sort of an existential, or what some would call a spiritual need, that we have just to understand our relationship to the world around us. Now, if you think that everything is created randomly and everything is separate and discrete, and that this is all kind of chaotic jumble of things that randomly happen, then you might get a sort of a sense of life that's a little bit threatening. You're going to feel a little bit alienated or isolated from the world because you view yourself as a discrete piece of it that was created but is constantly threatened maybe by the possibility of pain and suffering or doom. And so your general experience of life and your happiness might be affected by that. Whereas if you take another perspective, that in fact you are what the universe has done to itself. If you look at the Earth, for example, as a subset, the Earth at one time was a big ball of molten magma, and then it evolved and it evolved, and then now we're here. So we are actually the Earth. We're what the Earth has done to itself. We're aspects of the Earth that have arisen and can witness things and experience beautiful things. And so if you think of yourself as being an aspect of everything and still being connected to everything, there's a whole different kind of experience of life. If you choose to look at everything as some, creation that is just without intelligence, then you're never going to kind of form a relationship to reality that is similar to one in which you feel like there is some sort of intelligence or some sort of unified being to it all. So this is a need I would say that we have, just in the sense that whether we're conscious of it or not, we have some belief or understanding of what that looks like or what our relationship to reality as a whole is. And that sense that we have from that belief is going to affect whether or not we feel generally comfortable and safe and happy, or whether we feel like this underlying level of anxiety about what's going on. So I wanted to make this video specifically to talk about how important it is that we understand, okay, I've got these different types of needs. And I might be a person who more focuses on these kinds of needs than those, and really I don't need as much social contact, for example, as other people, or I might need more. It's important to understand these things to feel happy and fulfilled in our life in general. So another important part about understanding our needs and how fulfilling them leads to happiness regards addiction. Now, addiction is typically thought as being something relating to drugs or alcohol, but really any pleasurable activity can be addictive. Watching videos, for example. Now, the question becomes, why are we addicted? Is it some sort of flaw in our character? Well, maybe, but maybe it relates simply to unmet needs. See, when we have an unmet need, we get this feeling of kind of like emptiness inside. That's why we call happiness akin to fulfillment. It's because we feel fulfilled, we feel complete, like there isn't anything missing in our lives. But I think all of us have had this like sort of nagging feeling at one point or another in our lives that something is missing. We feel kind of empty inside. And that relates to unmet needs of some kind or another. So finding out if we are participating in some sort of addictive behavior, if we're starting to do these things where we're like, yeah, I really don't want to be doing this thing. I know I don't because it creates these kind of consequences in my life, but I can't seem to stop myself from doing them. You might examine, what kind of needs might I have that are not getting met? And then trying to address those needs rather than berating oneself. I've done plenty of that in my life, or blaming yourself. You might seek to understand yourself and why it is that you're engaging in these pleasurable activities, which are in essence sort of numbing you from that underlying feeling that there's something missing in your life. So it's really important to understand what your needs are so that you can then explore how to get them met. So in terms of how to get them met and understanding them, it's really important to acknowledge that some needs are very obvious: food, clothing, and shelter, as I mentioned earlier. All are generally accepted as a need that is very important to fulfill, and it's really acceptable to have those needs. But there are other needs that, unfortunately, our culture may look upon as being, dubious. So, for example, the need for touch or the need for sexual gratification. In many cultures, it's only acceptable to engage in the kinds of activities that are sexual if one is specifically, trying to reproduce. But there are many years in our life where we are feeling sexual attraction and sexual motivation, where perhaps we're not actually ready to undertake the responsibility of giving birth to another human being. And so it's important to think, okay, well, I have these needs. I'm not wrong for having them. In fact, the very biological drives that gave birth to me are now alive in me and seeking to, continue the species. This is very natural. So looking for ways that you can fulfill these needs without necessarily adopting the responsibility of another life is really important in terms of making sure that you're happy as a human being as you grow into adulthood. So acknowledging that one's cultural background can lead one to certain conflicts in relation to one's needs is important, because as you seek to actually be happy in your life, you might run up against situations where you find that you have these desires, you find that you have these needs that some part of your brain says that you shouldn't have, or some part of your beliefs sort of refuses you the fulfillment of. And so it's important to find ways that you can fulfill these needs in a healthy fashion. So that's one really important sort of dimension of fulfilling your needs and happiness, is understanding that addictive behaviors don't necessarily need to be looked at as shameful. Perhaps they can just be a barometer. They can just be a sign. Oh, I'm beginning to do this thing, which is pleasurable at the moment, but creates other not so desirable consequences later. Maybe I should look into my life and see where I might have needs that are unmet. Maybe you're not getting enough time with friends or family, enough connection time if you're a person who has more of your needs for happiness in relation to social activities and other people. Or perhaps you're not getting enough time alone, enough time to really ground in who it is that you are and what it is that you value. This is really important for all human beings, but in particular for those who are more solitary. So in terms of, again, addressing whether or not somebody has addictive behaviors, it's important to understand where their needs are before blaming them or holding them, completely responsible. Now, of course, we are responsible for our actions, and once you create certain consequences, you need to deal with them. So in this kind of a perspective that I'm offering, one can be sort of proactive, and as these addictive behaviors start to show up, rather than going into guilt and shame, which then can create more negative feelings, which then can lead people to go into more addictive behaviors, you can just say, I'm exhibiting this behavior and I'm having a hard time, controlling this behavior. Maybe I need to look into these other areas of my life and see where I've got some unmet needs. And even in particular, where do I have unmet needs that my cultural background may be giving me difficulty in acknowledging or meeting? There's a psychological term called cognitive dissonance, in which we experience conflicting thoughts and feelings. So for example, if you have a need that your culture says is not acceptable or allowable or is wicked, and yet you have this need, you're going to need to find some way, if you're really going to be happy, to have that need met in a way that is healthy and in balance and respectful of the people around you. So I offer this perspective about needs, happiness, and addiction to help anyone out there who might be experiencing something, challenging in their life around those kinds of behaviors. So another thing that's really important to understand about needs and happiness that is not so obvious is the role that pleasure plays. Now, of course, we're all interested in having pleasure in our lives. It's very natural that every day, every week, every month, and every year, we want to have certain pleasurable activities that makes it worth it to go through the effort and challenge that this life inherently has. For example, the loss that we experience just by being human is tough. And so we want to have good feelings to balance all that out, make us feel good about living our lives. But what's not so obvious is that as pleasure and comfort increase, we tend to take them for granted. And too much pleasure and comfort can be just as debilitating as having none at all. I'll give you an example. If in your life you are having everything come to you at the snap of a finger, and then you're waiting in line and the person ahead of you starts asking about the menu, sometimes you might get very, very frustrated. Frustrated way disproportionate to the situation at hand. And it's because you are accustomed to getting everything immediately, whenever you want. If you are truly grateful for your life and really appreciate what it is that you have, that moment will be just an opportunity for you to reflect on things that have happened that day or things you would like to create in the future, or actually just to be present to what's happening and hearing all the sounds going on around you, and perhaps turn and notice that someone you haven't talked to in a long time is sitting there. You know, there's all kinds of things that can be born of a moment of pause that we might otherwise feel frustrated by because we're just accustomed to everything happening exactly the way that we want to have it happen, exactly when we want to have it happen. So the sort of balance between pleasure and challenge is a really important thing to understand in relation to happiness. So, for example, if you find that your life is filled with immediate reward, and you do get frustrated over very small things far disproportionate to their actual circumstance, you might take a little moment and think to yourself, how can I introduce more challenge into my life? How can I determine to actually find opportunities where I'm experiencing difficulty? For example, working out really hard. That is inherently challenging on the body. And the mind has to overcome a certain threshold in order to push through the challenge that's at hand. And that kind of psychological trigger, actually I can push past this, can make you capable of far more in your life. And one of the things that is really important about fulfillment and happiness that I haven't talked about yet is about how there is an importance of accepting everything exactly as it is, and also an importance on having goals and looking forward and having something to evolve towards. Now, this is a balance that is really important because many people get stuck on one side or the other of that spectrum. Some people are like, everything's fine, no, I don't really need anything, everything's gonna be good. But if you just kind of go around and around and around in your life like a circle, and you don't really move towards anything new, generally there becomes this nagging sense that something's missing. The same way, if you are driving towards your goals over and over again, the moment you achieve a goal, there's only an instant of gratification, and then you're immediately on to the next goal and the next goal, you're going to find, no matter how accomplished you become, that there becomes this sense of emptiness that you experience that overlays everything else. And it's because there hasn't been any time taken to really stop and enjoy your life. So both of these things, which relate to happiness and needs, one, that there is this balance between having goals and looking towards the future, and being okay with things just as they are, and having as much pleasure as you would like, and making sure that there is enough challenge also in your life. These are two sort of balance points or fulcrums that are really important to consider in terms of finding happiness in your life. So I hope this exposition of the different kinds of needs that humans have and why they're important to happiness has been helpful to people. And I'm going to make a follow-up video about practices that we can undertake to help get us more in the direction of getting all of our needs met and fulfilling ourselves as humans. Thank you so much for watching.